I've managed to keep my son off of the thing.
Good, good.
All right.
You sell that for a lot of money.
The fact that that's okay upsets me.
All right. So, the idea of the banks was to spread them around the country. When in 1913, most of the banking action was around New York. And so a lot of these banks, as we eyeball them, are east of the Mississippi. We got Kansas City, San Fran, and you might be right. I don't have them all memorized. I have in the past when I had to study for a test, but Denver might be, no, it's San Fran. I think it's just San Fran and Kansas City are the ones west. Do you guys have your book out? What do you got? Minneapolis. I should have remembered that one. That's where I'm from. I've also visited the Minneapolis Fed. Boston, there we go. All right, so Minneapolis is right on the Mississippi. So as we've moved west, it's pretty limited on the amount of coverage that the banks have. But part of the reason they have them serving here is to get a feel for what's happening around the nation, so that if there was stuff happening in Kansas City in the Midwest or out in California, we're not just letting the New Yorkers call all the shots. The New Yorker is on this board all the time because it's probably less meaningful now, but in the day, he was right on Wall Street. Right? So he was right there to actually make the trades to influence the money supply. So that's why the New York Fed president's on there. All right, so let's see. The Fed chair is generally considered the second most powerful job, I want to call it that, or position, in government. And arguably, in the United States, it's one of the second most powerful positions in the world. What does it mean to have power? What does power mean? Control, right? What else? Money, influence, right? So that if you take an action, it influences a number of people. Doesn't that kind of mean what power means? And so we've got, who do you think's number one here? President. He's still got that big red button or red phone right next to his bed, and if he accidentally sleeps, then we might have nuclear war or something when he turns over, right? So he's generally considered the most powerful, but we got the Fed chair right in there at the second most powerful person. An interesting thing of how the Fed's set up is that the Fed is completely independent of the executive branch of government. Janet does not report to President Obama. Janet calls her own shots along with serving with the board, but she makes the decision without consulting President Obama one bit. And if President Obama says, hey, Janet, don't you think it'd be good to loosen up the money supply a little bit? She can give him the bird if she wants. Right? She's totally protected, right? Totally independent. And that turns out to be an important thing about the Federal Reserve. So, Fed and Fed chair are independent of other governments, government functions. So that includes the executive, the full executive branch, which of course President Obama's right at the top of the list, the executive and judicial branch. The Supreme Court has no say. They report to no one. They call all the shots themselves on what they think is the best thing to do for the economy in terms of entering the capital market or changing the money supply. They call all of those shots. All right, so that's an interesting fact that we'll kind of talk on a little bit more as we go. What backs the dollar? So when we think about these little dollars in our wallet, what backs the dollar? So we kind of dig in and we got, well, what's this thing worth here? What's supporting this?
It used to be gold, but we've gone off the gold standard.
We went off the gold standard, so it used to be gold. So what did it get substituted with?
Isn't as well because we say so.
What's that? So we had silver at some point.
Now it's, yes. Isn't it because we say so?
Do you guys remember what's on the back of this thing? What does it say in this little print? Anybody remember? In God we trust. You got it. That's who's backing it. Yep. We have what we call fiat money in the United States. There's nothing backing this. If the world ends, you don't have a claim on a fraction of gold. You might as well just crumple this little baby up and start a fire with it. That's the amount of benefit that you'll get from the dollar. There's nothing backing the currency other than what? Why do we use it then? You might say, well, geez, if I can't get gold, what keeps it going? What faith do you guys have in this now that it's not backed by gold? But what else do you got?
The fact I can still get it for pizza.
The fact that you can still get it for pizza, right? So your faith that another person in the United States will accept this as a means of payment is all you've got going for yourself. That's all you got. That's our system. That's what it's built on, is the faith of other people. Because if you go run again to President Obama, he's got nothing for you. He's like, well, you can go spend it at the store. I think Walmart's got some stuff for you, right? But that's who you're putting your faith in. There's nothing backing the currency. So we call it fiat currency. So what backs the currency? Nothing. It's truly unbacked. We call this fiat money. Unbacked currency. You've got the in God we trust. And you also have faith that someone will accept it. That's what it's got going for it. All right. So all these little interesting tidbits here. We've got one other measure of money, and I want to call to your attention. And this is closer to what the Federal Reserve monitors on a day-to-day basis. It is called the monetary base. The monetary base. The monetary base is the Federal Reserve notes This is the generic word for the currency. The dollar bills that are floating around we just had out. So in general, we call them a note. Federal Reserve notes plus bank deposits at the Fed plus some coins, which don't make up much, by the way, in the big picture. Add these three things together and you get the monetary base. Now, for those of you who had a little bit of accounting, if you are the accountant for the Federal Reserve, do the bank deposits at the Fed represent an asset or a liability of the Fed? When we have Great Southern's deposit at the central bank, if you put on your accounting hat as the central banker, as Janet Yellen, is that an asset of the bank or a liability? Notes. It's kind of like we issued them out, and in theory, we should owe something for them, right? So it's other people's assets. It's kind of a liability. So these are known as liabilities of the Fed, and it ends up being the base that supports the money supply. So this is the base that supports the money supply, the total quantity of money as measured by M2, but I'm not sure if I told you guys that one or not. M2 is the one that the Federal Reserve really watches the closest. So for the most part, when we talk about money supply, you can think about it being M2, which, remember, included M1 plus savings accounts, time deposits, and money market accounts. So those little bit less liquid elements as well. Okay, so the real money multiplier. The money multiplier can be thought of a little differently when we include the monetary base. So we did the deposit multiplier earlier. Now we've got the money multiplier. And MM is equal to the money supply. And this is the fully multiplied money supply. All the deposits, the savings accounts, the checking accounts, the number of currency. The money multiplier is the money supply divided by the monetary base. Which number is bigger? Is this thing greater than 1 or less than 1? Which one's bigger? The money supply or the monetary base?
The base.
The base? Think about what's going on here. Currency, which is in the money supply as long as it's out in the hands of the general public, which this is not, by the way, right?
Right.
So when we list it this way, this could be in a bank vault or in your pocket when we list it this way, right? But for the most part, that's part of that money supply. And then bank deposits at the Fed, what else did we call those a part of with reserves? It was one of the blank reserves. Required reserves, right? So if you have your money at the bank, you've got required reserves, which then leaves excess reserves to be loaned out. So this number is bigger than this one. And that's how we get the multiplying process. So, note, MS is greater than MB, which means MM is greater than 1. That's why we call it a multiplier. So, for example, if we've got a money multiplier of $300 billion in money supply divided by a $30 billion base, just plugging in a couple numbers to motivate things here, we've got a money multiplier of 10. If the Fed increases the monetary base by $2 billion, that will lead to a $20 billion change in the money supply. So by $2 billion, that'll lead to an increase of the money supply by 10. All right, we'll pick up there next time.